Hello, this is Andrew Al from Digital Charlotte, and welcome to the Digital Inclusion Exchange podcast. Today we'll be listening to the National Digital Inclusion Alliance's, also known as the NDIA's, Net Inclusion webinar series. The National Digital Inclusion Alliance Net Inclusion Conference has been a staple in the digital inclusion community for years, bringing hundreds of practitioners, advocates, academics, internet service providers, and policymakers together to share their knowledge. With social distancing in place, the NDIA is hosting the Net Inclusion 2020 webinar series to replace the conference. This series includes 8 one-hour webinars recorded live from September 16th through November 4th. You can find the full schedule, recordings, and resources at digitalinclusion.org/netinclusion2020 webinar series. The link to this will be in the description. Today's webinar topic is racial equity and digital inclusion. First recorded on September 30th, 2020. Enjoy.
Hello, this is the Net Inclusion webinar series. This is our third one, yes. So we'll be getting started just briefly. Welcome and hang tight. I'm Angela Seifer. I'm the Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. This is the third in our webinar series, our replacement of Net Inclusion, which is our usual in-person conference. So we'll be getting started in just a couple minutes. Until then, get settled, check out, how to, if you haven't done this before, look at how to add questions into the Q&A. That's where it's best for you to throw your questions. And then if you have comments or logistical kinds of issues, put those in the chat. And we are very excited to have this conversation with you. These are our sponsors of this webinar series. Big thanks to all of our sponsors, in large part because they thought they were sponsoring a full conference, and they generously allowed us to convert that sponsorship to the sponsorship of a webinar series. So we are very grateful to them. Okay, friends, I think it's time for us to get started. We're 3 minutes after. As with all of the webinars in our series, we make sure that these are available on our website. So we are recording this, and we will have any links. We continuously share those. So put your questions in, add links that you'd like to share in the chat, and we'll get started. So I'm super excited to have this particular panel today. With everything that's happening right now, it's very soul building to have folks who are doing work, how these folks are doing work, and that they think about it the way they think about it. So we're going to really get into some great stuff today. So real quick, I'm going to go around and everybody's going to kind of do the who you are and where you're from, what you do. We're going to keep this short. This whole thing's going to be pretty snappy so we can keep everybody engaged. James, can I start with you?
Sure. I'm James Walker. I am in Charlotte, North Carolina. Actually, our offices are at University of North Carolina, Charlotte's kind of innovation hub. I run and I'm the CEO of a 6-year-old social enterprise called Informative Technologies. We work with civic institutions and the digital inclusion sector to come up with scalable solutions for digital inclusion using computer science and data science.
Fabulous. Thank you. And Quincy.
I'm Quincy. I am a radical community organizer, doctoral student in social work, God willing, graduating in December, CEO and founder of EraseTheRedline Incorporated. And basically what we do at that nonprofit is assist smaller community-based organizations develop and increase their capacity to do more in their community. So we'll get into how that's done as we go throughout this conversation.
Great, thank you. Wanda.
And I'm Wanda Davis from Cleveland, Ohio. I have a small nonprofit. We call it the little engine that could and would and does. And our primary target audience is seniors. That's who we started training way back in 2002. And that continues to be our major population, even though we serve workforce development and mature adults.
Okay. because our topic is racial equity and it is a very personal topic, let's get into who you are and how you got into this work. Wanda, I think we've known each other almost 20 years now. We've been doing this work together for a long time. Tell us about how you, I mean, I could tell the story myself, but it seems more appropriate that you tell the story of how you got into digital inclusion work.
Well, first off, we have to back up to my first 20 years as an accountant and community activist in our Cleveland neighborhoods. We're in a predominantly African-American neighborhood and a heavy senior population. So being in that community activist role way back then, I had the opportunity to see the upturns and downturns in our economic stability in Cleveland. And one of the things that we were doing back then was doing neighborhood charrettes, finding out what has left, because a lot of our infrastructure had been, just torn down and depleted, storefronts gone, and a whole host of things where economic investment was definitely going to be needed. So what was going to be needed? What was on the horizon for our African-American community? Me being in the arena I noticed and knew that technology was going to be on the horizon and was going to be one of the things that was going to be a major factor in not just seniors' lives, but everybody's everyday life. And one quick anecdote that I always have to tell everybody was that I took my mom to the doctor, to Mount Sinai Hospital back 20 years ago. And so, of course, I was becoming her primary caregiver. And so I took her and registered her in, and usually they come get her right away. And then the next time I see her, she's back, she's complete, and I get the report. But this particular time, it took a lot longer than normal. And so I said, well, let me go and see where she is, and I'll make it real short. Went right around the corner, and she was sitting there, and no one had waited on her. And guess what was in front of her? The OCR monitor sitting there with the desktop computer. And I was like, Mom, what's going on? And she said, well, they sent me here and told me to fill it out. And I said, fill what out? And then the form was there. And I was like, oh, a light bulb hit. And I was like, we've been wondering what should be brought to our neighborhood. And that's what gave me and several other business people the idea to form a board of directors and do a survey and see if it would be accepted. Overwhelmingly it was, and thus here we are 20 years later.
Awesome. Thank you, Wanda. I love your story. Okay, James, how did you get into digital inclusion work?
Well, I have a unique, interesting background in that my father taught computer science at an HBCU a couple of years before I was born, and joined what most people don't know is a Black-led startup, which is Network Solutions, which created .com, .net, and .org. And it was the only place you can get one from the 80s to the 90s, the first actual .com boom. That transformed his life because his father was a sharecropper in Waco. And he always instilled in me and my younger brother a way to scale that, basically. Like, nobody would have ever looked at rural Waco and saw a future computer science. Computer science didn't even exist, but the drive existed and the ability to solve problems existed. And long story short, I stopped my normal pathway of, being an IT project manager and developer, and wanted to find a way to look at how do I scale access to technology, especially in light of those early Pew studies that showed 50% of African Americans didn't even have the devices we're sitting in front of, laptops and desktops at home. And this is, I started this in 2014. That study came out in 2015. So this is not ancient history to see that this problem has not, IT industry as usual has not innovated a solution to this. I wanted to innovate a solution to this and work and listen to nonprofits to know what the problem set was. And my computer science background from NC State allowed me to understand this is something that's solvable. It's preventable. It's something we can make a driverless car. You can certainly find a way to make an affordable, scalable, model for accessing technology. And
that's a fabulous statement, James. Like, if we can make a driverless car,
that's right.
We can't make sure everybody has access to technology. I love that a lot. I'm going to steal that.
Please do. And that's what I commit to doing. That's the core.
That's fabulous. Thank you. Quincy, how'd you get in this?
Wow, James' story it just touched my heart. I completely accidentally fell into digital inclusion work. Right. So I'm also an Iraqi war veteran. So when I came home from a deployment, I was shocked by what I was seeing in the neighborhood that I actually grew up in, how similar it was to like literally a training environment for war-torn countries, right? So not necessarily Iraq, but the training environment that we would go into to train for going to war in Iraq. And that was back in, I guess, 2012. So I started doing a lot of anti-poverty work. I joined the Anti-Poverty Network of New Jersey. Fast forward 7-8 years later, I get a degree in social work. I become a mental health therapist, substance use counselor on the professional side, and I'm still doing community organizing outside of that work. Fast forward another year or two, I enroll in a DSW program, a doctorate in social work program, and I began looking at anti-poverty initiatives under the grand challenges of social work. So I start first exploring homelessness, to eradicate homelessness. But in exploring that, I stumbled upon something called social isolation. And then I researched social isolation more and more. And the quick of the long for that is that there's internal feelings of security and there's the external abilities to actually reach out and grab something, right? So there's two types of social isolation. And then in looking in that and connecting social isolation with homelessness, I realized that the common denominator in both of those things were that individuals who are suffering with social isolation and individuals who are unhoused and dispossessed, the common thread was actually the lack of internet access and resources. And not necessarily the lack of internet access and device, but the lack of ability to connect with those things that are associated with device access. And then everything just came about, and I said, hey, I can tackle homelessness and social isolation and the digital divide through working on digital inclusion. And I know that sounds weird, but shared risk factors allows you to do a lot of things when you're working in community, with community, for community.
So I actually think that's pretty common, Quincy, that like we come to this work through something else, right? And so I love your story. I love everyone's stories because it says a lot about who we are. You mentioned digital redlining. You personally have done a lot of work around redlining, right? Like the original redlining. So let's talk a bit, because that's definitely a racial issue, and let's get into that a bit. Wanda, when NDIA did and sometimes we joke that this is the thing that brought us the most attention, is our digital redlining report. That digital redlining report originated in Cleveland with you and your staff. Can you talk a bit about when you were trying to get folks signed up for AT&T's discount program, and then we'll connect that to the digital redlining?
Yeah, well, we were fortunate enough to be part of the stimulus project in 2009. And through that project, we were connecting individuals to AT&T and other internet providers that were available. And at that time, AT&T actually had a discount program in which they offered that we were going to be able to connect people either for free or for discount. But they didn't tell us that it would be almost dial-up. So one of my instructors, we try to test out different projects, but this actually happened to one of our instructors at home. He went and he applied for the discounted program, and he was so frustrated he couldn't get in touch with anybody, and they could not bring the equipment out. And then finally, when they brought it out, the speed was almost close to dial-up, or maybe a little bit less. And so it was just proving to see that they had actually brought connections to our area, but never finished fully deploying everything they needed for us to be fully connected. Back then, I guess we were looking for at least 10 10 megabits or better. Of course, that would not suffice. And so, so we started checking with our clients and trying to see those that we were trying to help, and were they falling into the same same troubles. Were they actually getting help when they called A&T? Were they folks trying to make sure that once the equipment was delivered, it would be installed? And so some of the same problems were found to be true. And so that actually started us doing the full study.
And so we have a question in the chat asking what is redlining. So that's my mistake. Before I jumped into digital redlining, we should have defined redlining. Quincy, would you like to do that for us?
Sure, absolutely, because everyone should know it, right? So redlining was a term that came to being after we found maps that were created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation back in 1935. So the term itself, redlining, literally means a red line drawn around a particular community. But the reason that that community had a red line drawn around it was because during the, I guess we'll just speed it up and say, during the New Deal administration and the different things that came out from that administration, there was a mortgage program that started. Originally, we didn't have a mortgage program in the United States, right? So New Deal happens, Great Depression happens, the federal government says, okay, we don't want people to lose their homes. So what we'll do is begin offering mortgages, and we'll back up those mortgages for individuals. I think it's really important to emphasize that the mortgages that the government wanted to back were not afforded to, quote, Negroes, Southern Italians, and Jews, end quote. That's in the Homeowners Loan Corporation manual. So basically, the government backed mortgage companies to go into white communities and give them a 15-year amortized mortgage, which meant that you can be under in your housing payments, and the government is backing you to own your house and get out of your debt within 15 years. Black people, Southern Italians, and Jewish individuals weren't afforded those same rights. So back to redlining. So on these redlining maps that we didn't discover until the 60s, and that's why the Community Reinvestment Act came up. Sorry, doing this kind of fast, but there were 4 classifications on these redlining maps. So there was an A, B, a C, and a D area. So D area, where the Blacks and Southern Italians and Jews lived, was the red line area, and it was outlined in red. The other categories were A, which was a green area, which meant it's all right. Those communities are all white, right? The B area was saying that there's some mixing in that community. They're mostly professionals and there's some laborers, but no minority laborers. C was a yellow area, which meant that that area would soon be in turmoil and be a red area, right? So A, B, C, and D, redlining comes from that red line area. And then other things are attached to that. And I'll pause there because I think that Wanda's going to go back into it, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, so that is super helpful. Thank you, Quincy. So the trajectory of what happened with the digital redlining is that Wanda's team is figuring this out. They're realizing we can't get connected to even the minimum that is required for AT&T's discount program. Why is that? And we really, like, in all transparency, Wanda's folks and NDIA folks, we stumbled over this for a good amount of time trying to figure out, we're like, well, why can't they? They're eligible. There's clearly AT&T service. And what we finally realized is that it is so slow, the speed coming into Rick's house and some of the others, is that, which by the way, I've also known Rick for about 20 years. I know, Wanda, I'm sorry, I'm totally giving away our ages. But it's so slow coming into those houses that it's not even eligible for this discount program, because the minimum for the discount program was 5. Was it 5 or 3? Anyhow, it was crazy. It was already crazy slow. So that led NDIA to create the maps, to overlay the poverty data with the availability data. And the availability data, in terms of what broadband service is available, came from the FCC, and the FCC got it from the providers. So it was AT&T's own data overlaid with poverty data to show us that those same red lines, Looks like a lot of the same red lines. The neighborhoods that have been systematically excluded in the past from the housing market were also being systematically excluded from this broadband technology. Wanda, anything you want to add to that story?
No, I was just going to say exactly what you just said, that, once the maps were reviewed, that the exact redlining that was done by the banks here in Cleveland were the exact same red lines. So it's just as Quincy had said, we were excluded from the housing mortgages and just about everything else that has been actually out to help individuals that we had been excluded from. You can go all the way back to when when they started helping people with folks, helping them with purchasing their own home with Section 8 and programs like that. And the Caucasians were able to participate in that. And then as soon as it was revealed, that this was going on and we had some African Americans to start to participate, then all of the rules changed. And then, so it just, like you say, it's systemic, is there, it keeps going on, but now we have platforms to call it out.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Wanda. So James, I've heard you compare the digital redlining and food deserts, like explaining the problems connected to both. Can you go into that for us?
Sure. When you're looking at how to scale a solution, and I know we also have this talk about access and availability, and I'll wait for you to see if that's something that you want to talk about as well. But when you look at food, we're in America, you could go to McDonald's, it's a stone's throw away. People are not dying of hunger in the obvious way that it might be in a country in another continent. So people might say at one level, there isn't really a food security issue. And yet the people who are on the ground understand, okay, that quality, nutritious food is not available if you don't own a car near your home. You can't go grocery shopping because the food is too expensive to grocery shop. You're eating foods that are going to get you to have more issues with diabetes. And there's so many other things that come out of something that seems so simple of where fresh produce can be found. And that's the work that has to happen at a systemic level that deals with the supply chain and access and how you plan and zone things. And that is how you kind of address the issue. Similarly, someone might say, it's 2020. Look, everybody's on Zoom. We're on Zoom. We've achieved the goal of digital inclusion. And yeah, in some sense, there are people who can get on the internet in some form, on a phone or of some kind or some fashion as a consumer of a social media product. But to be able to be a productive citizen who can attend school for 7 hours a day, work for 8 hours a day, learn, after work, at night school online, those are things that are still unavailable with the issues regarding what we just heard of in terms of quality broadband. It is not simply do you have the screw for a cable jack in your home. It is much more about what kind of service levels do you get in your neighborhood? Does the company see your neighborhood as a priority? And in a word, I see it, and in the way that I'm approaching it, and many of us are approaching it, is actually the way that you should approach an emerging market. Middle class income in a country like India is about $10,000 a year. You paid everything off. You're living well above 50% of most people in that country. That's almost like homeless level wages. It's like part-time minimum wage to make $10,000 here in America. No one would question whether an Indian national can work remotely in India in many places that are making way less than what an American would make. They figured it out because industry and society said, we are a priority to a lot of people. And therefore the infrastructure to support hundreds of millions of people getting online at a price point that they can afford, right?
So the price is an important point, right? That's an addition to the slow speeds and the kinds of devices and the kinds of connectivity that folks have. In the United States, we know that internet here is expensive. As you're mentioning, it's cheaper in places like India. So that's another inequity. And as we have are diving into this issue, and there are more folks diving in with us, we're able to have these conversations where we can get really into the nitty gritty of, it's not just people have it or people don't have it. It's what speeds, what devices, what is the technology that they're accessing it for, what's the cost of that technology. So let's talk a bit about the access issue. So we use the word access, and sometimes we mean availability and sometimes we mean adoption. James, do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I found this on the solution provider side, an interesting kind of redlining, more in the sense of a bureaucratic redlining. There's money on the table right now in our state of North Carolina, millions of dollars, tens of millions, actually, about 30 million, right now as a part of CARES Act to introduce broadband solutions to communities where less than 10% of people, 10% at the most, have access, only 10% at the most have access to broadband. That legal term access is not like the casual way that an advocate might say, okay, access, do you have it, do you use it? Access literally will mean, and we've talked to other providers with wireless ISPs and others who've been working in rural counties, that literally means, do you have the screw in the wall from some cable company that does provide broadband? If you have that in your mobile home, home, then you have access. Therefore, I can't say, oh, well, only 10% of people have broadband at the full definition of broadband. No, that's utilization and adoption. And now I cannot, even though they know they have to budget 30 million towards this to help rural counties or inner city urban areas, their wording itself of access, it seems like it was written, the only way it could have been done is if it were written with the idea of excluding someone like ourselves from coming in and competing with those who provided that wireline infrastructure 30 years ago. That is something that is then stopped not only our projects, but other wireless ISP projects from being able to serve census tracts that are highly disconnected because, again, of that wording. And I think that this is an example of if you're an advocate or if you're trying to understand what legislature can do, they got the money right, but then the wording handcuffs us. And we now have to say, I'm sorry, rural community, I'm sorry, inner city community, you do have access according to the way this legislation was written years ago for our regulation in our state. And I cannot.
I don't even know that's years ago, James.
Really?
Yeah, I think some of it's still being written today because the state laws today are still being written. Yeah, we already had the federal ones, but the state ones are up and coming right now. So this is an area where we need to do a lot of educating. One of the ways that NDIA has been thinking about this and talking about it with our community is maybe we don't use the word access at all. Maybe we use availability and adoption because access can be misunderstood so easily. Right? It can be understood as one or the other, but really somebody means something in particular. A few months ago, NDIA came out with a paper around racial equity and federal investment. And so what we said was the fact that the federal government is investing in rural broadband deployment projects and not investing in a broadband adoption projects anywhere, including urban, means that that is a racially inequitable, structurally racist and inequitable policy because it essentially helps middle, higher income white folks more so than anybody else. And that's totally wrong. But there's been this mindset, I think, of folks of thinking of, well, it's a bootstrap thing. Here's your tool. If you want to use it, use it. If you don't know how to use it, best of luck to you. Or if you can't afford it, maybe you should try it harder. Thoughts, team? Quincy, you definitely have some thoughts.
You know I do. Right? So these conversations are really confusing for us who communicate with each other all the time, right? And may use different terminology for different things. Just to double back to digital redlining and the polysemy or the double meanings and dichotomy around one particular term. So if I'm having the conversation with housing advocates about digital redlining, their interpretation of what I'm saying is literally that, okay, people who are selling homes are targeting to sell those homes only in certain areas. And we can do that through targeted marketing with our analytics and everything that we do, right? In the DI or digital inclusion space, that means what we just described it as, from different points of view. So yes, that language is important. And also assisting academics and those in power, especially our elected officials, and understanding like, okay, let's put a pause on it for a second. You're an expert in what you do. The individuals in community are literally the experts in what they do, right? So let's shift that power dynamic a little bit when we can say, okay, you have all this access, authority, and resources, but you have no clue what you're doing most of the time, right? You're hiring consultants to tell you what the best thing is. And if those consultants aren't involved on the ground, then are you really getting the best bang for your buck? That's one. Number two is this idea of who's worthy of access and support, right? Let's really consider this for a second, just with simple math and simple like people, right? So K through 12 needs devices in order to do their schoolwork, right? So they can complete their schoolwork and hopefully become educated enough to graduate high school and then make it to college, right? And then hopefully gain workforce skills and more education. However, the individuals who are not in the workforce and not in the educational fields don't need it because they don't need it and they're not doing anything productive with themselves. But we have to understand mutual causality and understand, okay, those kids who don't have access, their parents probably don't have access and their grandparents probably don't have access. So when you're saying that, yes, we're going to give you the device, but it's only for this K to 12, then what you're doing is actually, number one, making them reliant upon your system, which is why I believe in equity and actually giving people devices and not loaning them out. That's a different conversation in a different webinar. We can have that conversation, right? But it's also about shifting your paradigm of thinking to say, okay, well, can we get this like a bulk rate, right? Maybe if I have to provide this access to these youth, then maybe if their parents had access at a younger age and even now, then they'd probably be able to be more quote unquote productive, right? Depending on what measurables you're looking at. And maybe, maybe if my head of households in my communities were more productive, then maybe my community would be more stable, right? And then maybe if my communities were more stable, my municipality would be, and then it goes up the ladder, right? From municipality to county to state and then region. Yes. But if you're not looking at it in a way that investment in that individual who isn't as quote unquote productive as you want them to be, there's a reason for that. And oftentimes they're in those same red line areas. So if you think about those divestments and the disinvestments and the inability for individuals to actually get opportunity, because it's not just a equity conversation, it's an equality conversation, it's an opportunity conversation, all based on this device or another device.
The focus on the students, right? Without recognizing students are living with some adults, really, friends, just makes me want to scream. As if these kids who, we have to say it, right? This is focusing on the kids as if they don't have adults. It's patriarchal, as you said, right? It's like, oh, we have to take care of the children because they're innocent. I would even go so far to say it's racist because the kids are innocent because they're young, but the parents, oh, they've made some mistakes, so we can't possibly help them. Even right now, there's been a new HEROES Act. So there was a HEROES Act in the House. There's a new HEROES Act in the House. They actually moved money from a subsidy that was supposed to go to cover broadband for households, low-income households, into that money then goes to schools and libraries. So makes me want to scream.
Can I just mention something around that really quickly?
Yeah, please.
When we do that, again, that's that transfer of opportunity to individuals who already have the opportunity, right? And that's literally locking people out. So these bootstrap ideologies, they bother me because those individuals who use that terminology probably don't realize that individuals are literally choosing out of the options that they have. Right? So you're saying that they maybe made a mistake, while they're choosing out of the options that they have because of the policies that you've created and signed off on in the first place to lock them out because they weren't worthy enough to get your support when we're all connected. It really makes no sense.
And so this goes to the structural, historical, institutional racism. Let's talk a bit about the connection of the digital inclusion work to the Black Lives Matter movement. Quincy, we'll start with you.
Yes. Okay. So this is a family show. So I'll just say that I love hashtags. Say her name. I love hashtags BLM. I love it, right? Because it starts the conversation or it furthers the conversation that's kind of been occurring behind doors, but certain people just weren't listening, right? Because those voices that were screaming because of what they were suffering through weren't worth being heard, right? So that's one thing. Another part of that may be that while it seems that so many people are in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement for Black lives, I struggle with what is performative allyship versus what is actually being invested in these communities. What does that equity work look like, right? What do those transfers of power look like, right? Because it's great to have a DEI, or a diversity, equity, and inclusion hire to look at your policies that you already knew were screwed up in the first place. Let's be clear, right? Because systems run to sustain themselves, right? And this is all systems. They run to sustain themselves. No system is going to create something that cannibalizes them. None. Or else it wouldn't be called a system. It would be called something else because
Right.
they got a business fast. So it's really important to just be really intentional, but also have some accountability, right? Because yes, I want to see hashtags. Yes, I want to see statements of support, but I also need to see some of that investment going to those individuals who are hurting the most. Why? Because when you provide opportunities to individuals, believe it or not, they actually take advantage of those opportunities and use them for the greater good of all of us, right? So it's not a zero-sum game and saying like, we're going to not give it to these people because then we'll have less. No, you're at the top of the food chain. You have a major share and you're going to benefit probably more than those people anyway. So we have to be a lot more strategic and intentional with the way that we move money around and taking advantage of certain tax zones, because opportunity zones are actually located in those areas that were redlined. And if you want a great tax break off your capital gains tax, then it may make sense for you to partner with a smaller community-based organization so they can have the power and the equity to actually hire more people, especially if they're connected to like community colleges who are struggling right now. And the
Right.
cycle kind of feeds off of itself, but guarantees equity for that community.
Perfect. Thank you. James, let's talk a bit about how COVID has changed your work, in particular, your relationships with government agencies.
I have been working with WIOA, and by the way, excellent contributions, everyone. I've been working with WIOA, like Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funded programs for youth, basically in the school to prison pipeline, since year 2 of running this, so the last 5 years. It was always pro bono. The trainings that I did, thousands of hours of getting students to be trained into what we now call digital navigators, what we call civic technicians in our company, was something that helped me understand by listening to their lived experience of students coming from the same sectors that we're talking about, growing up without a computer and you're 17 and you're about to graduate next year. That informed a lot of the way that I approached projects with the government today. Thank God. I just learned that I won my second CARES Act in partnership with the library. One is deploying 5,000 households worth of computers, and what is called mechtech.org. Mecklenburg County is the county around Charlotte, so MECK tech.org if you want to find out about that. Or if you're in the area and you're affected by COVID-19 and you need technology, it's a free program funded by CARES. We also got funding from IMLS to build a wireless ISP, strategically deployed across the city grid, across basically the opportunity zones, the crescent of poverty that the way that the lay of the land looks like in Charlotte, where a lot of these devices will end up being. So that, of course, there's a lot of scrutiny to get to that point, and certainly to be the lead, to be able to architect that is very humbling. But it's been because I was in the system, I was doing the hard work, underpaid, struggling bootstrap startup, social venture style all along, that allowed me to have the insights to not just have connections. Everybody likes to say who you know, but it was that the community understands the approach that I have is scalable because I've listened for half a decade to what people need. So I have to say it is favorable. The fact that what I just mentioned earlier about that there's state money to help accelerate more work like this, but that the wording is clearly written with the lobbyist's intent in mind and not the community's intent in mind about you got to have a limited of access, not adoption, not anything more sophisticated in terms of literacy levels, but just physical. The signal can come to you where you live. If there's a radio tower that comes to you, or there's a screw in the wall from a cable company, that I find frustrating, but I think we have the will now to be able to challenge those things in a way where we all have not seen funding like this earmarked for our work ever before.
Right. The specific way, James, that NDIA has been addressing that barrier is to encourage the addition of eligibility based upon economically underserved. So not only underserved in that there's not much infrastructure available there, but economically underserved and that the population is low income and they have low broadband adoption rates. That those two should be taken into account, those two factors, when determining where infrastructure investment goes, because here's what we're seeing during COVID that we weren't really seeing much before, is infrastructure deployment to address affordability. That's not a thing that we've seen, right? So like, that's what you are doing, James, and that's what others that we're seeing around the country are doing right now. They're building infrastructure to address affordability, but that's not really what was happening before, in part because that's where all the money was, as you said, going to places where there was no infrastructure. But it's also, let's get back to that community part. Like the solutions right now are so local. How's the federal government helping? The CARES Act was really valuable. But beyond the CARES Act, how's the federal government helping any of your work? Not so much. Right? And I think we're on the cusp of changing that, but it is this advocacy that you all do, this education that you all do within your communities and nationally, being on webinars like this, where we could change the conversation, and we have to change the conversation. I think, Wanda, you in particular, I joke that internally at NDIA, when we're ever like, well, should we do something or not? I say, does this help Wanda? Like, I don't know if I ever told you that. That's a thing that occurs within my staff. Does this help Wanda? Just because you've been with us like since before. And so you have been doing this work for so long, and you now have community partners you didn't really have before. So COVID made that happen, right? That awareness happened. Talk to us a little bit about those new community partnerships that you have.
Yeah, well, I want to just say thank you for making sure that you address does that help us? Because you know exactly how I've been, I say sometimes I felt as the only one challenging the ISPs in our communities that you're really not helping us. You're promising that you have a product that we can use, we can help, but you're really not giving us the help that we needed. You're not committing to the community investment that our communities need. And I talked to AT&T, Spectrum, Verizon, and all of them. And one thing that COVID did for us, I was on a call today and I tell them it's twofold. It's unfortunate because of how it's destroying lives, but it's fortunate because it allowed Cleveland to develop this really, really robust digital equity coalition, a coalition that I've been trying to do, working with Bill Callahan and others that are in this city, trying to see that we had a coalition that's addressing, digital literacy, tech support, internet connection. So that has allowed us to actually develop this coalition. And one of the key pieces for me, of course, is the seniors. And I have the opportunity now to connect with all of the social agencies within our area to track some of the social determinants of health and to assist those people with information where digital inclusion, digital technology can help them serve the clients that they're serving. I didn't have access to this before because they were not educated enough to know how digital inclusion will help them serve their population. So this coalition has kind of brought that together and given us an opportunity to take a look at it and to rework how digital inclusion and the digital social services arena has kind of joined together. With that being said, the WRAA Area on Aging and several other aging groups, they're helping us to become advocates and take a look at what we need to have in our communities, in our greater Cleveland community. So they're looking at the state House Bill 13, trying to get liaison partners to make sure that urban areas are included, especially for our senior population, since our school districts have actually been able to obtain more funds because of COVID, and they've gotten a lot of help. Our digital equity help has brought a lot of funds in for our Cleveland public school system and our breakthrough school system. So that's kind of been addressed. You know, the Band-Aids are there, and so that more funding can be raised. But for our senior population, and I even say mature African-American population that are just above the poverty level, what is there to help them? Of course, we all know the redlining and all the things that the non-investment in our areas cause them to try to keep up. So some of them get connected this month and then disconnected the next because they have to make the same decisions that low-income people have to make. So it's a combined effort. So with these new organizations that we've been exposed to, they're exposed to us, they're exposed to all of the digital inclusion agencies now in our area where they can reach out and find help for their constituents. So we got a new coalition built, is working towards addressing the advocacy of it, is working toward addressing funding, you know, for all of the organizations. We're hoping to come out of this with a unique plan for the city of Cleveland. And I can say we've tried to involve our leadership in the city of Cleveland for years. And so now I can say they are aboard. They're actually creating a plan that's going to help try and help us to kind of, I don't want to say make a dent, but get some traction going, get some traction going so that all of the ISPs are in this coalition. So all the ones I've been talking to individually, now when they hear the complaints, they're hearing it uniformly. So the AT&T is there, Verizon's there, Spectrum's there, WOW is there, East Cleveland Cable is there. And they're all trying to say, well, how can we do this thing together? The competition has came in. I can say since competition has came in, cost is coming down. So we're just going to continue this coalition. It's so fortunate for us here in Cleveland. And, I'm glad to be a part of it.
I'm a huge fan of coalitions.
Yeah.
Clearly, that's essentially what we are.
Yeah.
That's what NDIA is.
Really, COVID shed the light, it shed the light on, and this is my little quote, and I said, it shed the light on the internet. Internet connection was a luxury for a lot of folks a lot of years, but now it's essential. It is essential. So we're addressing that, going forward.
Quincy, can you chime in on the coalitions piece?
Yes, absolutely. Some really important things happen in community, right? There's power in numbers. So this is actually linked back to the pivot that I had to make during COVID, or why I felt it was important to pivot during COVID. So I stopped being a mental health therapist and a substance abuse counselor because, again, I was working across from people who looked like me every day, trying to assist them and fix them themselves when they were living in a broken system. So I stopped doing that so I can push the system to fix itself. So in the time of COVID, pre-COVID, I was able to amass some technology, right, out of my own pocket to provide access to devices, Chromebooks, to about 36 families. And I said, this is like, it's not really hard, right? Because a nonprofit has to prove that it can do something and it's moving effectively because there's barriers there, right? So you can qualify for a grant unless you're a nonprofit, but even as a nonprofit, you won't get a grant unless you can show about 3 years worth of you working effectively, right? So how do you manage that? So from taking those approaches that I learned from being a micro and then a macro level social worker and community organizer, I said, is it smarter and more effective for me to actually target community-based organizations and communities that are doing work to include digital inclusion into the work that they're already doing versus me doing it on a macro level? And when I started to look at things in that vein, I realized, okay, my impact may be a few dozen people, but my network is huge, right? With the organizations that I'm on the board of, I'm advising or consulting literally at least 100 organizations throughout the state yearly. So what does that look like? Because if I can do 3 dozen devices out of my pocket, I'm sure that my community partners can do much more. So again, with that pivot, what I did was look in the problem space and said, okay, so who's doing something similar to what I'm doing? And could I partner with them or should I partner with them? So I found a great organization, TDI Connect in Mercer County, New Jersey, who were already on a shoestring budget, providing access to 1,000 devices in underserved communities a year on a shoestring budget. So I said, they're doing something great. Can I model that? And they're in Central Jersey. Now can I do that in South Jersey? But instead of me just doing it out of my technology wellness barbershop, which I didn't mention, right? Maybe I can set up nodes in South Jersey and model their program, right? Because if those individual community partners that I'm already working with are doing that work, then it should be a quite easy transition, and it's additional resources coming into them for the work that they're doing, right? So now we're not just doing telehealth, but imagine a mental health therapist actually providing the device to the individual that is coming in for treatment. Because if you're only doing telehealth for those who you already have in your lexicon, then you haven't really done a market analysis to reach out as far as you can to increase your market share in the substance abuse and mental health community, in addition to the digital inclusion community. So just looking at those shared risk factors and saying, okay, so if I'm providing this device for this individual to get to this thing, whatever that thing is, how can I bring those coalition partners together to be able to market our strength in numbers and see what we're able to do by modeling best practices that aren't really noticed as best practices yet, because of course there's that gap between theory and practice. I'm learning that right now at the doctorate level, where I'm talking to professors and I'm like, no, that's not really how it's done in community, but okay, you got to grade my paper, so I'll take that for now. That's how it works sometimes.
That's fascinating, Quincy. I was just on a webinar yesterday where there was somebody claiming we just need more data, like as if we couldn't do anything right now. But the fact that you all are doing things without a ton of data, it just, I think it shows the passion and the connection where yes, we do need the right data in order to keep doing it more effectively, but that shouldn't keep us from not doing things. We have to still do things. Right. In fact, the example I gave was in Cleveland, the foundation had been thinking ahead on this stuff for years and had brought in a computer refurbisher. I live in Columbus, Ohio. We don't have any such thing like they do. Their computer refurbisher specifically refurbishes to get devices into homes. So what has happened during COVID? Folks in Columbus are driving to Cleveland to the computer refurbisher, right? Like folks in Columbus are appreciative that Cleveland thought ahead. The Cleveland Foundation in particular, let's just call him out, Leon, a person, right? Thought ahead to make sure that there is a refurbisher there that we now find valuable. Do I need additional data to tell me that it's valuable to have that refurbisher there? No, the gas money alone is the proof that it's valuable to have that refurbisher there. James, thoughts?
On the need for
Whatever
data?
you like, James.
I think that it's really a good challenge. I mean, I just was speaking with folks at Digital US before our call here, and to see the work that's being done in digital navigation, And the fact that I'm tapping refurbishers who are zero landfill, and they have all of this stuff, and I'm using Linux and open source and all of my advanced computer science knowledge of my graduate students. Many of them are from India, and I asked them, by the way, about that when I mentioned India. I'm not just using it off the cuff. I literally wanted to know, how in the world is a country where middle class is $10,000 produce so much talent, and it's equal men and women? And I'm learning from them too. And it's like, this is a really great time to be in, where we're seeing so many players able to come together on every aspect of educating people for workforce, working across racial lines to understand each other's communities, understanding the history of the issue, but also using engineering to solve it. And I think that I certainly think that this is part of the issue of the IT talent pipeline. This is how I address it. I know that a person who's comfortable from the suburbs and wants to study computer science because they want to be the next Elon Musk of some kind, or next Mark Zuckerberg, may not be interested in talking to somebody's grandmother in the hood for a long period of time about Zoom. But someone from that same census tract, that same neighborhood block, would find a great deal of self-worth and value out of helping my friend's grandmother, because it's not just a random woman anymore, talk to her family for their family reunion, because it's a personal thing and they understand this is a human issue that we're helping. And I see that there is a strong talent pool coming out of what we currently call the school to prison pipeline, of people who, just like my students who come particularly from India, who are the grad students, who are straight A students, who love to learn that there's a lot of people who are in the same economic situation as what their family looks like at home, right? But they could help share lessons. Like that could one day be like Southern Asia. Like, these people are hungry to grow and hungry to use technology in new ways to solve problems that are relevant. And just as you have it where people who, again, you had Gandhi in a toga just demanding basic rights. Now, you know, you don't have to necessarily like globalism, but I have to say, this is a really interesting thing. A British-born person in Oxford today wonders whether an Indian can just get on broadband and do the same job for 10 times less. That doesn't exist currently in communities that look like mine or my dad's when he grew up, or my mom's, right? I would love it to be that people say, hey, you know, that person there, that's a hungry problem solver right there, you know? And if we got the infrastructure right and we work together through the NDIA, we have the Charlotte Digital Inclusion Alliance here, local summits like this, we could have a future where by the end of this decade, we have people who have the low cost access to data and hardware and the hunger to innovate that has changed the global south and other parts of the world. Nobody questions a Nigerian student's ability to compete in this economy, or an Ethiopian student's either. So even though, again, I agree there's racial animus in some people's hearts, some people can come here straight from the continent in the hardest subjects, and they just have, oh, finally I have access to more information and more data than I had at home, and they go up. I would love that to be the approach that we take, so that we can build that out. Mm-hmm. So that these are we're not looking at this as you said, children need to go to school and we're throwing out a couple of Wi-Fi's here or there for some folks in some poor community. No, you're thinking of it as, I am investing, I'm on the ground floor of the emerging market. Yeah. The future majority of the American demography in about 2 more decades. I'm the company, that's what I hope to be honest. That's the new Microsoft that's listening to them. That let Microsoft continue to help our work, but I'd love to see this new version of a new generation get the access and take that hunger that's, as our brother Quincy and Wanda put it, they have access to, turning around some things for a profit that are illegal. Turn around technology, learn refurbishing. You can do that all day long, and there's always a market. If we gave that to them, you would see a flourishing, I guarantee it. So I'm full with of hope and optimism. I know many people are frustrated, but I feel hope and optimism that people across demographic lines, across income lines, racial lines are coming together on this issue, and we are doing it now. And I hope that if there are Republicans on the line and they like opportunity zones, and there are Democrats on the line and they want more of what we see in the CARES Act and to go even deeper, more systemically, oh, great. I hope that becomes the new infrastructure handshake.
That's right.
You know, that allows that to happen.
That was perfect, James. You all are NDIA's inspiration, right? Because you do what you do, that's why we do what we do. We wouldn't exist if you all weren't doing the work that you're doing. We have a few more questions, and we did promise that we would stay on for an additional 30 minutes. We are at our hour, so if anyone needs to head off, we totally understand. Nobody will be offended. It's all being recorded. If you want to catch the extra 30 minutes, this is also being recorded. We have some questions, panelists, that have come in, so let's run through these real quick. Well, within 30 minutes, anyhow. The question about making digital access a necessary utility. So this has been coming up a lot during COVID. It didn't really come up previous to COVID, except by, 4 people. What do we think about that? Quincy, looks like you have a thought.
Yeah.
I do. Does it absolutely make sense as a utility? It does. The barriers to get those empowered to understand appropriate regulation of what should be a utility, there's reasons for saying yay or nay, right? These are political decisions. These are things that operate for a reason. With a lot of the great programs that we see corporations investing in, they're kind of doing it for their bottom line, right? So there has to be a trade-off in order for those empowered to say, okay, yes, that is a utility, right? Because they also lose some of their political power, right? And lobbying is a big thing. So
because right now, who controls internet service in the United States?
The providers.
Not the people, right? The providers control it all. How heavily regulated is broadband in the U.S.? Not. About that much. Right? Very, very small amount. So if we all recognize the internet is essential. How can we, if we end up not legally calling it a utility, how can we get closer to that though? What are some of the policies that we can change? And I think James's point earlier about what federal money is available to an organization like his, that's how we get there in part, right? Because why were the laws written the way they were written? To benefit the ISPs.
Mm-hmm.
And can we also say that maybe if technology provisions weren't voluntary through SNAP programs and TANF and if these programs weren't voluntary and up to an administrator who may or may not know what's going on at the census tract level, we'd get something a bit differently. And these siloed conversations, right? Because again, pitching technology as something that's included with mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment from the School of Social Work, that gets pushed back on and says, well, Medicaid won't cover that, so how else do you pay for it? And my argument is, well, let's see, if a person is suffering from an addiction or have a mental health issue, then that means they have a disability, correct? And that means that, this individual is covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, correct? Assistive technology is afforded for those who are covered under the ADA, correct? So maybe it's not necessarily the coverage possibilities not being there. Maybe it's academia and some of the people in power shifting their mindset about what is already in law, right? Because we can fight and we can march and we can preach all day, every day. But if we don't hold individuals accountable for the laws that are already on the books and walk them through the implementation phase, then we'll say we don't know how to get technology to individuals when it's already in the books and it's already should be afforded to them. And why, if you're a public servant, is a provision optional for you to provide to the people who pay your paycheck?
That's a particularly fabulous example. Workforce in particular. So right, the workforce investment funds that are out there, it is up to the states to determine if they want to include broadband and device purchasing as part of what gets provided to the participants of those workforce programs. The state makes the decision, and then the local programs get to make another decision. So it's like the states can be like, yeah, we'll allow it. And then the local programs can be like, we're not going to allow it. So there's all of that potential for
making the argument.
Making an argument, keeping people down.
And I just add that's one of the reasons why I've been really working with the social service agencies, because they touch all of the health disparities that you're talking about, and all of the income that they get from the state, which comes from the feds. All it has to do is that money can be earmarked to ensure that the access, the devices, the training, that can be used to ensure that. And once they do that, it will cover all of our folks. It will cover the kids, it will cover the mature adults in workforce development, and it will cover our seniors. And we won't have to worry about SNAP and discounts and discounts, because they can get that to where it's in a level playing field. If you take all those ISPs and they take their territories, and the government makes sure that, okay, your territory is northeast, southwest, and how they all survive, then they can make them see how the Lifeline program can be utilized by all of them, and they won't stop their income. This can be done, it can be handled. So, that's what I say, and that's what I tell them. Y'all need to come together and find a way to work together to make sure that everybody across this nation have affordable, quality broadband. There's no need for us not to have it in our country.
James.
Yeah, I was in researching what I'm going to do for the I'm the solutions architect for both of these projects with the CARES grant. So we have great partners who are going to be doing a lot of implementation, and the library will oversee it for the public good. But I was looking at models of, outside of a regulation structure, like it's a regulated utility. I'm going to paste a link here. European Union has this thing called the digital single market, and this idea of their shared digital future. And here you see their basic business models for ISPs, and in there is the open access network model.
Yeah.
And I think something that they're saying is, look, across all of the member states of the European Union, which there are sovereign countries, but they basically have like a federated way of doing things consistently across national boundaries. They're saying, look, you could have, not unlike what we do with electricity. Yeah, a company made the electricity, but you can run a factory off of that. You can build other things off of that. You can sell appliances off of that. The roads are a basic thing that the government provides, and you can have UPS ship on it and DHL ship on it. So there could be a basic tier of passive, like ISP service. Here's the wires that are in the ground, light them all up. And then when it comes to retailing that, finding markets for that to solve different market needs, then the costs of digging into the ground come out, right? So what you charge a person, it's not based on like what a typical utility would say. If it was a power company, they would say, we need to make another reactor for a nuclear plant. Okay. Well, you take that off the table with an ISP. You didn't have to dig anything. You're just tapping into a line that was already there. That drops dramatically lower the costs. And we know that this can work. And we're hoping to find ways to work with, frankly, if there's Google Fiber, if there are other tiers that provide gigabit internet, we're going to be broadcasting a signal to neighborhoods in need and providing premise-wide internet. Very, very much like what we heard with MetaMesh on Friday. It was MetaMesh, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very low cost, tens of thousands of dollars thing that if you have hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can really hit multiple neighborhoods with connectivity for a year, right? Because you didn't have to dig anything in the ground. And I think that is a kind of interoperability that I see as a person in computer science and I teach computer scientists. I see that is why me building an app, which is one of the things I can do, I can put it on Amazon's web service for free for like a year. And I have the power of Amazon's entire global like data center infrastructure that I didn't have to build. And if my app starts to consume more resources, it might be a few $dozen a month. So that's what the software world already did in the last decade. If the broadband sector did the same thing here, imagine that same kind of thing. Like, oh, okay, I want to start an ISP too. We're going to do it for nonprofit purposes. We're going to do it with Quincy running it, or Miss Wanda here is going to run it. We can do it for a year for free, or, you know, it's $10 a month. I could see that because that's what the software world is now. When I got my degree in the first decade, that was not the case. You had to build out a data center of your own. It's extremely expensive. The cloud changed that. This is the version, the open access network would be what the cloud did, but for taking those costs down just to get the data. And that's part of what you see with India in that BBC article.
That's fabulous, James.
Can I just share the Digital C is here in Cleveland, Ohio, and they are setting up similar to what you're saying. They actually have a really, really low cost service, which is giving them, 25 megs up, and better in some areas, depending, of course, how close you are, but definitely above the broadband definition of 25 megabits per second. So that type of network, getting the support that it needs to continue expansion is similar to what you're talking about. It's affordable. It's all the kid, you can have it's Wi-Fi. It can be Wi-Fi, and it comes directly to the home. So I know that with that type of a service, and then if it's expanded across the city of Cleveland, we could be connected, I'd say within a year with Wi-Fi for everyone across this city.
Okay, we're going to move into some other questions from folks. One of them has to do with Sprint's program, which is now the Sprint T-Mobile program. So the question is, what about that program? We don't see a lot come across the NDIA list about it. NDIA doesn't get excited about it. And the reason we don't get excited about it is the data cap. I think they're at 100 gig for the year. So a student could get a free device and 100 gig for the year. Are we really solving any problems with that?
We always appreciate the sentiment of that.
Do we, James?
Well, those who receive it, I'm sure, appreciate that there's something rather than nothing. But I would say, yeah, it's just now, because again, I know actually that's what my dad did, is that, being a network engineer and network architect and building out what we, like texting and all of that. I got to, as a younger child, see how the infrastructure was built out. And it's like, put something on a tower. It's like, I've seen it here, for example, locally, raising $1 million to distribute 6,000 of these through like the public schools foundation, right? And so like, football players and things chipped in, and here's $1 million. We got 6 million of these things out here. I just described, and you heard from MetaMesh and others, okay, we have a little shoestring $50,000 budget, boom, tower, 900 families. Like, if we had $1 million put into just get the signals pointed at the entire neighborhood from a tower, especially if it were a municipal tower, like a police tower, which tends to be in the neighborhoods we're talking about, you don't even have to pay for the tower then. If you just have the municipal authority say, you can mount something there and point it there, as long as we know what you're doing with it. Yeah. You could blanket that coverage, get the devices out there, and have premise-wide networking like you do on a college campus. Nobody is surprised that 30,000 people can get online, which is a small town, or a good-sized town, at any given time on a college campus for free on a guest network, because they just put the money into the infrastructure for that. And that is something that I would love to see more of, because those devices are making a lot of good money for Sprint.
Yeah.
But okay, you cut them off at the end of the year. What happens if I'm 18 and I just graduated in May of this pandemic, and now what? I'm not. My family doesn't need it anymore. I don't.
So let me ask you though, James. So the student gets the device, There's that data limit on it. What happens when they run out of data and they want more data? Do they, let's list all the possibilities. They just go without.
Yeah.
They find a public option somewhere. They buy more data from Sprint.
Unaffordable. Unaffordable.
This is where really, like, I think this is a point where we do have to ask the question, do we appreciate their efforts? Are the efforts actually helping? Or, and this again gets back to that issue of only focusing on the student rather than the whole family, are the efforts diverting the little bit of resources that we have to solutions that are not actually the full solution? So it's diverting that bit of resource. So the school and others are paying a lot of attention on a program that gets students the free device and 100 gigs for the year, which they're quickly going to run through, instead of spending their time figuring out, maybe partnering with you to build a solution. Yes, it might cost them some more money, but it's going to probably get some results that are a lot bigger than what they would have gotten with the first offer.
Yes.
You see where, like, I get concerned about offers that may be well-intentioned.
Yeah,
but
the soup
keep
kitchen
us...
talked of charity.
Yes.
I give you a bowl of soup, so see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock for the next meal that I will dole out because I'm in control, and and I feel great about all the soup I'm doling out. And it's like, okay, well, you stand in the sun and get the soup. Yeah, I have to agree. I would say the same thing with the giveaway programs, which for technology, with no like digital inclusion support, and we're doing like literally tech support with the librarians as a front end. If there's a tech question, instead of saying it's kind of beyond our purview, create a ticket, and then our team of civic technicians would close out tickets. Like, I don't know how to get my computer to talk to my printer. That's something that a librarian would kind of cut it off at. If you want to know how to learn things online or whatever, or have classes for digital literacy, that's where they engage. Well, now we can provide that too. If that's also combined with a service level for internet connectivity, like the signal, I know there was a storm and something is knocked out of sync, to just bring that in the same, again, the people are there as library scientists. They're there to provide information for free, the common good. We can just get information and improve the infrastructure better, rather than, as you just said, the service level is very much, you got something for free and take it or leave it. And that's it. And then typically, if you take a look at the true open access model, there's a 3-tier model. It's a bit, if you're into this stuff, I would say go to that link at europa.eu, which is like their commons for the EU's kind of strategic agenda. They're pointing out basically, in some countries that do this in Europe, literally you pick an ISP, because it's like almost like picking how do you want your Amazon order? Do you want a DHL, UPS, USPS, like just normal postal service? That is how you would say, I'm on Sprint right now. Sprint is giving me something for free. Oh, here's this thing that Informative Technologies did with the library. So the library has a free tier. You can pick that free tier. Maybe that free tier has some limits to it in some capacity for whatever reason. Okay, who's the more affordable other option on the market? And I just click it, and now my services come from Sprint or whatever the equivalent would be in Europe. And I, the consumer, am in complete control. And if I don't like your service levels, the infrastructure is still sitting on that tower, right? They call it passive infrastructure. It's still sitting there. Who creates the best service levels for me? Now, I might be a business and I need gigabit internet. Okay, then there's a tier that I pay for because it's the same infrastructure. That, I think, outside of regulation as a utility, provides another model for control to be in the hand of the consumer. If you're going to spend the money to build that infrastructure once, that other people can build things that fit and compete on satisfaction.
James, I heard an example of what you were saying that apparently there was a plan for, but it got smashed down. The plan was in Cincinnati, and I live in Ohio, and I did not hear about this when it was happening. I only heard about it recently. Apparently years ago, Cincinnati's plan was to build out their own fiber, tack on $20 to everybody's water bill. They would all get 10-1, right? 10 down, 1 up of broadband service. And then it would be an open network. other providers could come in and provide service, most people would want more than 10-1. So they'd be paying these other providers for that service, but there'd be this minimum for everybody. What happened? It's gone. Never happened. Why is that? The internet service providers didn't want it to happen.
And this is what I love about NDIA in this community, right? So when we look at community, oftentimes people look at it as being something that's like geographically defined, but we're like so like-minded that it's just like, no, that's like my cousin, right? And also James is so bold, because what he just ran through is something that, as a business owner and as the leader of different organizations, I may have held so close to my heart and not shared publicly, right? So that's one of the great things about these organizations.
Yeah.
But I think also the most important thing that I took out of what James just described is that we're not really thinking business-minded enough to do the work that we need to do in communities, right? Because we oftentimes work with such small budgets, we have this scarcity mindset, right, where we're grabbing for what's close and we can't even fathom thinking ahead of that. What James just described was trusting the process and not worrying about the product. Everyone, probably most people on this call, focus so much on the product, the end result, that we're not understanding all the different things that we can do when we create programs around the process. When he's talking about putting up nodes in different areas, that's a workforce investment plan, right? That's also training around those issues. That's also GIS and surveying and mapping. And what else comes out of that program that he just discussed is just like, okay, we can do that for $1 million. You're telling me that we can change the trajectory of an entire population for $1 million. That's what James is describing. And I'm not sure if people are picking out those different things, but that's what innovation is about. Like, I'm just glad to be here.
I'm humbled by that. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Can I bring us to a connector point? So Quincy, at the beginning, you mentioned something about loaner computers instead of giving people computers or selling them computers, and how that's not getting us to the great end goal. Right? If we want, for example, if we want folks to get into technical fields, if we loan them a computer to fill out their unemployment benefits, but they can't have the computer to continue learning, talk to me about the inequity of that.
So I kind of look at it as a nerd, right? First of all, right, my daughter has just learned how to replace SSD cards, right? So for that 11-year-old, what that 11-year-old now knows how to do is to allow dad purchase lots of, not lots like a lot, but lots of used computers and changing out the SSD card, right? So my regular price point for the technology that I was providing at zero cost to the end user initially was between $100 and $150, right? For the Chromebooks. The SSD card cost a whole lot less than that, right? So now the thing that we're looking at is being able to provide 5 devices for the price that I used to pay for 1. So that's one thing. But also that 11-year-old girl understanding that, hold on, I can actually do something because I'm provided opportunity and these resources are in my lap right now. But the nerdy part of how I look at that is like on this tech continuum, right? We have 0 being no access and no resources, and 4 or 5 being like full access, uploaded hardware, software, social networks like NDIA and our other reference networks and social networks, the ability to tap into systems and the ability to do work within those systems that you're tapping into, right? So it's this like, you have 0 and then you have this level of 5 where there's so many different things that you can do with it. I just got excited. So I may have forgotten your question, but I look at it as a continuum of the tech continuum, right? Where it's just like, you can do different things at each access point, and you can gamify it too. Let's work on making it to the next level. What do you get for making it to that next level? The idea of ownership. That's where we're looking at it at. you look at things a lot differently when you own something than when you have to give something back, right?
That's right.
And the self-efficacy of being able to acquire may mean for that person who has nothing left at the end of the day to say, you know what, this thing, right, just allowed me not only to do different things and to look at more opportunity, but like somebody cares.
Right.
That's the difference. And also the other side of that is the last dozen or so Chromebooks I bought, my intention was to literally distribute them to people who could not afford them. What happened ultimately was a school district waited to the last minute to order their Chromebooks, only had 400 devices when they needed 1,100 devices. So what happens? There's a shortage in Chromebooks. Individuals are trying to order Chromebooks, but they can't get them for anything less than $300-400. So my thing was, okay, for these families that I know can possibly afford it, they're at the higher end, you can pay me for these laptops that I were going to distribute anyway. Pay me what you want and pay me what you can afford to pay me for them, because I bought them out of my own pocket. Whatever the loss is, I'll write it off, right? They bought them at purchase price, which then allows me to still go out and do that same thing that my 11-year-old daughter knows how to do now.
Right.
So what does that look like? That matters ultimately.
Fabulous. Okay, team, we only have a couple minutes left, so let's do a quick round around the virtual room. Last thoughts that you want to make sure that you share with our viewers. Wanda, you want to go first?
Just to go back to the hotspots, just, since I am a hotspot reseller.
You are the hotspot queen, Wanda.
It is a Band-Aid, but it's always better than nothing. So we know that is a Band-Aid, so we know there's a lot of work to do. If you have infrastructures in your area, be an advocate for those that are trying to. I'm not an internet service provider, but the project that James was talking about is on its way here in Cleveland. I'm excited about it with Digital C. I still think that we can reach citywide Wi-Fi in our city with the help of all of the folks that are now in our coalition. It may not be for free, but it can be at the low cost rate where it's usable, attainable, and folks will be able to have good connection, and the kids can participate, and then you can still have the hotspot for a while, which means that I believe that every household should have multiple devices, and if they don't have 300 gigabits or better, then 2 devices giving off internet is still great.
Fabulous. Thank you, Wanda. James, last thoughts.
I would say that if we can think about this as investing in an emerging economy, which is, I actually did a project with Fayetteville, North Carolina's opportunity zones, like through their mayor's office. And there's a lot of opportunity there. I can have my costs of infrastructure defrayed if I am thinking the right way, right there. I mean, yeah, you can use it as gentrify, but if we think of this as investing in an emerging market and getting tax return, tax benefits on one side and, government money on the other side. And this is going to, again, in a decade, help these communities become what, if you think about it, their ethnic equivalents in South America or Sub-Saharan Africa are doing, in Kenya, Silicon Savannah, and Ethiopia and Nigeria. We could see a really good future in a lot of these communities, creating jobs in the same communities from the same people, and having tech companies that are not only saying, oh, we have 5% diversity, let's, yay for us, to no, we are outcompeted because we did not invest appropriately in these markets. We threw away stuff at them, give them bones, but we did not invest in their capacity. And those organizations that are ready to team up on that, I think we'll see the fruits of their work in a fully socially sustainable way. You're going to see the change in how you look at the school system. You're going to look at political engagement as something that is a part of this. There's something there to build for, your future. a digital navigator can help enroll someone for census and voting and having a library card and everything else too, helping understand what is a PTA. If you're getting gentrified, yeah, I'll take another $100,000 of equity because I have financial literacy, and I'll invest it in my own infrastructure too. I think that that's the approach that I hope that we can take on this. And it's not only to look at it as, yeah, we have been redlined and these are the sins of the past, but let those who want to ignore, let them ignore. As a social entrepreneur, it's like, yeah, actually, you know what? I'll take your grant money or whatever from any company, from any Silicon Valley place. You just be happy with your 5% diversity while I kind of focus on the future growth model for this country.
Thank you, James.
Yeah.
Last thoughts, Quincy.
Support, donate. We're the experts in this. Most of you who are on this call are the experts in this, hopefully. Academia doesn't have the answers for what we're doing right now. So what really helps is when we don't have that empirical data and knowledge, it's input from individuals in the community who are the experts, because guess what? Your expertise outweighs the books that they're looking in because these stories haven't been written yet. So if you can't donate money, try to donate time, try to lend support through your networks to say, okay, I don't have it to give to you, but this person may have it to give to you. If you're associated with the university and you know you have some pull at that university, then what community-based organization could be benefiting off of your university status and allowing them to run apprenticeships at their agency, right? Because many community-based organizations don't have that $40,000 treasury bond in order to start an apprenticeship there. And the reason that that's important is because the moment that a community-based organization can prove to the feds that they can actually run an apprenticeship program, they can be federally recognized as an apprenticeship. And then they literally qualify for the same funding from the federal government that your state Department of Labor acquires. But if they don't know, and if they don't have those connections that all of you have, then what can we do at the end of the day except keep saying that, no, this is performative allyship. And I don't think that hashtag BLM and the hashtag say her name really matters to you.
You all are amazing. For all of our viewers who are still with us, if you want more of this, it's at digitalinclusion.org. If you haven't joined NDIA already, do it. It's free. It's these three folks who are amazing and more amazing folks. So big thank you to James, Quincy, and Wanda. You all are rock stars. Thank you for giving us an hour and a half of your time today.
Glad to see you guys. Bye.
It's been an honor. Thank you all. Thank you, Angela, for your leadership and your voice that you've lended to all of us throughout this pandemic to get us so far.
Absolutely, James.
Along with your
We can do
team.
more.
Yeah. And the 20 years.
That's right, to another 20 years, Wanda.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.